oh no, I can't accept $10,000. I can't, they won't take my $10,000. Welcome back, everyone, to yet another episode of Zillennial Money. This is episode 61. And boy, do we have a spicy episode today. So, might get us canceled for some of our opinions, but we live for the controversy. So, this is going to be a fun episode. And I can see Tristan staring into the abyss in fear already, which is always a great sign. So without further ado, let's jump into the first, perhaps the most controversial story of today. We got to talk about the LA riots, right? So this is a story that kind of just blew up all of a sudden. And, you know, I say all of a sudden, but like, you know, the deep-rooted causes of why this kind of protest got out of control, it's been years and years in the making, right? In case you guys have been living under a rock and aren't aware, this is about the ICE raids. Now, ICE stands for Internal Customs and Border Patrol. It's like the U.S. border guard agencies who's been tasked by Trump to deport illegal immigrants. Now, of course, this is a very controversial topic in of itself, but the latest kind of development is that the ICE officials are doing these raids where they're hitting a bunch of places at once where they know that illegal immigrants tend to hang out, and they're arresting a bunch of people and doing what Trump is calling mass deportations. Now this has obviously rubbed some people the wrong way. Now the Democrats, they don't agree with this policy to begin with, obviously. So people went out on the street and protest, and they say it's a protest, but let's face it, some of it did get incredibly violent. So there's, I can show you this picture of what U.S. Senator John Fetterman, who's a Democrat, by the way, but he disagrees with the violence, as we all should, but apparently not everybody sees a problem with the violence. But he's saying how people are burning cars, this is chaos. I'm hearing reports that people are calling Waymos to just for the purpose of burning them, just because I guess we hate Waymos or we hate Google, and it's got to be directed at AI and automation because it's taking away our jobs. It's a lot of there's a lot of I would call far left ideology baked into all of this, like anarchism and stuff like that. And there's people burning cars, people looting stores. That's a big one. People just, all around being reckless. And this is America too. So there's gun violence in a few isolated incidents as well. People burning American flags and people waving Mexican flags, which is another piece of controversy that I guess we'll talk about later. But yeah, basically, if you guys look at the first post, this is what John Fetterman said, who's more on the moderate side of the Democrats, but he is a Democrat. And he says, I unapologetically stand for free speech, peaceful demonstrations, and immigration. But this is not that. This is anarchy and true chaos. My party loses the moral high ground when we refuse to condemn settings, cars on fire, destroying buildings, and assaulting law enforcement. So this is his opinion. But then, you look at someone like Kamala Harris, for instance, who's more representative of the traditional, I guess I shouldn't say traditional, but the establishment Democrat Party at the moment. And I know a lot of people say that she's no longer the leader of the Democratic Party, but she's still, probably one of the most well-known Democrats at the moment. And Kamala said, look, Los Angeles is my home. And like so many Americans, I am deeply appalled by what we're witnessing on the streets of our city, deploying the National Guard, which is what Trump is doing or trying to do is a dangerous escalation meant to provoke chaos. Now, in addition to the recent ICE raids in Southern California and across our nation, it is part of Trump's administration's cruel and calculated agenda to spread panic and division. This administration's actions are not about public safety. They're about stoking fear of a community demanding dignity and due process. Protest is a powerful tool, essential in the fight for justice. And as our LAPD mayor and governor have noted, demonstrations in defense of our immigrant neighbors have always been overwhelmingly peaceful. I continue to support the millions of Americans who are standing up to protect our most fundamental rights and freedoms. So, a lot of people have criticized Kamala Harris for this response where she stated that the demonstrations have been overwhelmingly peaceful, but clearly there are instances where it got out of control. So like, how do you define overwhelmingly peaceful, right? And just in case you think I'm making this up, there's the Apple store in downtown LA got looted, and you can see from even just the screenshot, somebody spray painted "No Ice" on the window. So this is like with regards to a anti-ICE protest. That I'm not saying that like looting the stores is like an organized event made by the people who are protesting, but obviously there are some people who take advantage of the opportunity, and it's just like the protest started off as a anti mass deportation demonstration, and then it just degrades to looting, right? So this is unfortunately the case, and yeah, again, I would take issue with Kamala Harris saying that it's been overwhelmingly peaceful. It definitely has not been. Just I don't even want to say in my opinion if you just look at the facts, right? And throughout all of this, in LA, and there's isolated incidents all over the country, by the way. It's not just LA, but it's the worst in LA. The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, just went on Twitter and did all this like anti-Trump kind of rant about how the Republicans are all about protecting states' rights. Why don't they just let him handle this situation? Why does Trump have to interfere and send in the National Guard? This is unconstitutional because it's violating states' rights, blah, 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 right? So he's saying that 4,800 troops are unconstitutionally activated, with only a mere fraction being stationed at federal buildings. Let's be clear, it's our police force doing the work to protect our streets. We don't need or want the military patrolling our communities. We're cleaning up Trump's, I think it got cut off, but it's like we're cleaning up Trump's mess or something like that. And there's a community note that is being proposed in response to Gavin Newsom, suggesting that, hey, this is like, it's not unconstitutional to mobilize the National Guard if there's a rebellion or invasion. And the sitting United States president has the power to invoke a provision of Title 10 to do this legally if there is a rebellion or invasion. So again, there's some leeway, right? There's some room for interpretation. Like, how do you determine what is a rebellion or invasion, right? So maybe a argument in Trump's favor that this is maybe an invasion is that you have people on the streets waving Mexican flags and burning American flags in LA, which is part of America, right? So first of all, I just find this kind of funny how a bunch of people are protesting against being deported to, let's say, Mexico. It might not be Mexico, but let's just say Mexico. And then they're like, Mexico's the best country in the world. I'm going to wave around a Mexican flag. And then the ICE officials are like, okay, well, if America's so bad and Mexico is so good, that's perfect. We're going to deport you to Mexico. They're like, no, I'm not going to Mexico. Like, don't deport me to Mexico. I'll do anything. Like, what do they want, right? Like, they want to be in Mexico, but not in Mexico. Like, Mexico is the best country in the world, but they're in America saying that, and they don't want to go to Mexico. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. And I'm like, I know this is something that like right-wing kind of influencers have been saying as a joke, but like, I actually don't understand from like how it is a joke, because it does seem like it's pretty illogical, right? Like I just don't. I'm genuinely trying to understand from the other side, like what these people are thinking, or maybe they're thinking like, okay, well, California used to be part of Mexico, and then like the U.S. annexed it after the U.S.-Mexico war. So maybe their standpoint is that the U.S. is illegally occupying this land that should belong to Mexico because it did a few hundred years ago. Well, then in that case, like the counter argument to that is that not even the Mexican government is claiming that land. And it is like the Mexican government officially recognizes California as part of the United States. So they're actually going against the official Mexican government's narrative on that. And also, if you believe that California is part of Mexico and you're waving a Mexican flag around trying to take over the land, like, isn't that actually an invasion? I don't know. So this is kind of like the controversy, right? So I'm curious to hear what you guys think, but let me just present to you this tweet, right? So this person, I don't know who he is, but I think he makes a great point where he shows a picture of the protester waving the Mexican flag, and he says, for every liberal claiming that Trump is being a dictator for trying to restore order from violent radicals in LA, I have a challenge for you. Go to Mexico, attack their police force, set a car on fire, and hoist the American flag in the air and report back on how it goes, right? So the point is that if you do this in any nation where you take a foreign country's flag and then you disrupt, public services, you fight their, local police force, you just cause a lot of violence, you set cars on fire, present a safety hazard to the entire public, and then you like burn their flag and raise your own country's flag, like, isn't that an invasion, right? Or at least an insurrection? So I think he's had a point there, right? So yeah, this is kind of the situation where the ICE like protests / riots are right now. And my question to you guys is, first of all, do you think that this is like a riot? Like, is that a correct term to describe it? Or is it just, a few isolated incidents in an otherwise overwhelmingly peaceful protest, as Kamala Harris would put it? And number two, do you think it is within Trump's rights to send in the National Guard? Or is Trump just, trying to provoke something out of nothing, which is what Gavin Newsom has said? And lastly, where do you stand on the kind of Mexico versus America type of thing? Like, do you see a problem with people in America burning American flags and raising the Mexican flag? Do you think that that's, maybe grounds for calling it an invasion or at least an insurrection? So just those three questions, quite controversial, but I'm sure you guys will navigate through this maze without getting canceled. So either one of you wants to take it.
I can go first, since I always take the side of the controversial stuff. But I think that overall, like the Mexican flag waving thing is just one incident, but like it is bad optics for sure. Like, it's like that seems to be like, just like with mass immigration, it just seems to be like a trend where we are having these massive protests in our cities and people are waving flags of other countries. Like in this case, they're actually like protesting American policy, but it's just funny how every time there's like a controversy around mass immigration, whether it's in Canada or like Europe, people are waving like other people's flags and debating issues that don't necessarily interest the actual local population in that country. But in terms of like, is it a riot? Is it insurrection? Yeah, I mean, like if you're gonna call January 6th an insurrection, I don't know why you wouldn't call this an insurrection, because it's basically the same thing. I mean, it's always kind of my line that like the insurrection was just a riot. They just like came up with a word that made it kind of worse than it was, but it was just a riot, and this is a riot too. I agree that there's probably like people who are lawfully, peacefully protesting, and there's likely people who are rioting. So it's always a little of both of these things, and you never really know what's happening on the street unless you're actually there. So I can only like comment on what I'm seeing on the internet and what I'm seeing on the news. But in general, I would just say that it's enough of a riot that like it has to be dealt with. And in terms of like, yeah, like I agree with what you're basically saying, Andy, which is, or like what I think what you were, I think you were kind of saying both sides of the argument, but the idea of like waving the Mexican flag and saying like you can't deport me, I'm Mexican, I'm gonna wave my flag and have this nationalist moment, and then but you're living in the United States. Like I think that generally when immigration works well, new immigrants usually like show respect for the country they are in, and that's true for any country. I think that like there's like certain like types of far left wing politics has made it like almost like when people wave the Canadian flag, they're often accused of being like white nationalists or something like that, and then when people are waving foreign flags in a riot in a country, it's like, well, it's a freedom of speech. Well, I mean, it is a freedom of speech. They're allowed to do it. I'm not against people waving the Mexican flag, but the point being that it's just bad optics. If you're sitting here, you want to be American, you want to live in America, then wave the American flag while you're protesting American policy. That's probably better optics. That's just my opinion on that.
Let me
go ahead.
you off right there because I wanted to make a point, right? So for those people that are, just trying to defend the waving Mexican flag and burning the American flag type of thing, just swap it for like swap the second country for a different country that you don't like, right? Like, so for example, instead of Mexico versus America, and let's say you're in America, right? So if you're in America, instead of Mexico versus America, it's like China versus America or something like that. Like, think of what would happen if like a bunch of Asian looking people, like Chinese looking people, they might be Chinese Americans, but whatever, like a bunch of Chinese looking people going out to the streets, setting a bunch of American flags on fire and waving the Chinese flag around. Like, would you also be in support of that if you're in support of this, right? Like, just, I feel like people kind of give the waving the Mexico flag thing a pass because a lot of people like Mexico as a whole. And I'm not against like people liking Mexico. I like Mexico too, but it's just, like people are blinded by their own kind of bias, I feel like. But if you just swap it for a different country, like if you just try to look at it objectively, you'll see that like this is I don't want to say like not okay, because like it is okay from like a freedom of speech perspective, but it's like it's not, it's like you said, Sunil, it's not good optics, right?
Yeah, I mean, if the defense for this kind of riot, the defense for the riot is that this is freedom of speech. So yeah, okay, it's freedom of speech. You got me there. You're allowed to wave whatever flag you want. Like North America is society that people often have flags from their home countries. I'm not against it in general, but if you're doing it in a disrespectful way, you can't be mad that like people on the internet like are pro bringing in the National Guard and ending the riot. Like it's just when you set up when the optics are so bad, I just don't think it's going to work out well for you. And if you went to Japan and waved the American flag and burned the Japanese flag or whatever, like that wouldn't go over well. If you went to India and did that, it wouldn't go over well. If you went to like Saudi Arabia and did that, it wouldn't go over well. I mean, every country's going to deal with you differently depending on if they're a dictatorship or they have freedom of speech. But like, I can guarantee you, it's just like it's not a thing you should be doing. So like America kind of allows people to burn their flag, and they have that's it's kind of almost an American tradition to do so. But if you want to win like a political argument, like in front of the media and in front of social media, you should be a little bit more respectful and not like offend a large percentage of the country by burning the American flag. I just don't see what the point of it is, while I do support people's right to do it. And then just generally adding more commentary. Like I just think I can guarantee you that Trump is probably like there's probably an angle here where Trump is like taking advantage of a situation, and maybe he shouldn't. Maybe he's sending the National Guard in for his own political optics, and he just sees an opportunity to look good in front of his supporters and stuff. But what I will say is that like I think Trump's like doing a really good job like feeding his base, and I don't think the Democrats are getting many fans here. Like I think the Democrats optically are just doing a bad job here because like they're defending a guy who's burning the American flag and waving a Mexican flag and looking like a scary looking guy. Like they're defending this kind of action. And like the mayor and the mayor, I think her name's Karen Bass. Like she's like defending the protesters who were destroying a small part of their city. I just don't think it looks good for Democratic politicians. I don't think they're winning any fans here. I think they're just marginalizing themselves like usual, and they're letting Trump look good in front of his base. So they're kind of just handing Trump a win here. It's kind of how I look at it. Like he doesn't need to win the hearts and minds of 75% of the country to get a win here. He just has to keep his base happy, and he just has to get like a few independents to be like, hey, we got to stop this riot. You shouldn't be burning American flags. So I just think the general talking points I'm seeing for the Democratic Party are just making it easier on Trump. Like they're not even doing a good job. Like, I mean, you could win this thing. The Democrats could probably win this debate of sending ICE agents into like courtrooms and schools, but they just seem incapable of like setting out the right optics on any situation.
I think that this topic is something that is very nuanced, that my opinion is going to be based on information that is incomplete, passed on by biased sources who have already come to whatever their conclusions are about the state of this situation. And that makes it very hard for me to give a answer that is particularly satisfying one way or the other. From my perspective, the majority of the coverage that I see tends to be suggesting that these are more peaceful protests with some rioting, which, as kind of we've frequently had established, oftentimes there is, when there's a large group of people, a few bad actors can turn a peaceful protest into a much larger problem, aka more of a riot situation than the intentions are. In this situation, it's clear that there is some instances of bad actors who are doing bad things, for example, like burning cars or looting. These are likely not like there's no guarantee that these individuals are the protesters themselves and not just individuals taking advantage of an inability of police enforcement to prevent actions such as looting and destruction of property. So I suspect a significant amount of the looting, for example, would be people just taking advantage of the situation rather than any, like, the protesters being the looters, for example. I think the vast majority of the protests are peaceful. Most of the people who are protesting are not there to destroy anything. They're not there to cause any problems. I don't think that this is a situation where the left has rolled out of bed and decided to destroy the city of LA. I think this is a clear pushback against what is perceived as government overreach from the ICE agents, where they are essentially just nabbing people who may or may not be illegal immigrants off the street and determining if they're going to be deporting them. Not necessarily like determining that at a later date. And I think that there is a significant fear in the average person from a perspective of like, what is the chance that I could be nabbed on the street by ICE agents, whether you're illegal or not? All they have to do is make a mistake and decide that you're illegal even when you're not. And good luck fighting them after they've already nabbed you. So I understand that there is a very good reason to be pushing back and protesting against these sorts of the aggressive route that the leadership in the U.S. has approached the situation with illegal immigrants. It's a complicated situation because on one hand, illegal immigrants did not come in legally, and they can cause some problems. They haven't been properly vetted. They haven't been there's no way to track exactly who they are, why they've come in, etc., which creates its own set of problems. But at the same time, they do provide a significant amount of additional value to the U.S. economy from a lower income worker perspective, from a just worker in general. Like the illegal immigrants are. The majority of the illegal immigrants will be paying some form of taxes, even if it's just goods and services taxes. So this is, they are likely to be taxpayers as well. So it's just the whole situation is very nuanced, and acting like Trump is entirely in the right would be irresponsible, but also understanding that we also can't have a protest escalate into a riot on a large scale that causes significant damage. It is also, something we have to keep in mind. We can't have this turn into something that actually, does significant damage to the city, because again, this will be something that needs to be resolved. In terms of like someone will need to pay the bill at the end of the situation. I think that from my perspective, the reasoning for people protesting is very it's pretty reasonable. I understand why people are angry, and I don't think that it's just about them being about like an illegal immigrants versus the government kind of thing. I think this is more nuanced than that. And I think that Trump bringing in the National Guard, I think it is an escalation. I think this is a clear action of the president trying to do a show of force that he is willing to put down what he has determined is a rebellion or invasion. Whether or not this is or isn't either of those things, I don't think that this necessitates the National Guard in terms of like, I don't think this is a rebellion or an invasion. And just to Sunil's point on the January 6th, that was that in terms of rioting, that action legitimately caused significantly more threat to the leadership of the U.S. than a riot in LA would, given the fact that we had actual rioters within the what's it called building. So either way,
Building, the Capitol building.
Yeah, the Capitol building. That's the one. So that's a significantly larger threat to the country in terms of like damage to a potential damage to the leadership of the country. So, for example, like we don't know what would happen if that riot had reached members of parliament, for example. Like, what would they have done? Because if they had reached them and decided that it was eat the politicians' day, that would have been very much an insurrection. Right? Like, it may not have been an organized insurrection, but it would be kind of more along the lines of like, a Boston Tea Party-esque, yeah, we're going to throw some tea in the river. That's a good idea. We're going to go protest at the Capitol building. And, watch how this goes from us throwing some tea in the river to us fighting the redcoats. So I'm just saying. And with regards to the Mexican flags, etc., like, it just, I think this is more akin to, as Sunil was kind of saying, with like people waving the flags of their like different countries. Like, America is a diverse place. People will be waving the flags of wherever they basically see the origin from. I understand the optics on that specific photo of someone who is clearly participating in more inflammatory actions. Waving a Mexican flag is not a very good look. But again, I don't think that this is an example of like, I think this is an example of a bad actor. I don't think this is indicative of what the majority of the protesters are doing. I think this is very much like, we're picking out, it's picking out instances of bad actors who are doing terrible things, and painting the entire protest as basically the same as that. Whereas it's really not the same, and it's a lot more nuanced than that. And I hope that kind of communicates sort of what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that explanation. And you know what? Like, honestly, I don't fundamentally disagree with much of what you've said. The only thing I'll add is just that, I know everybody has a bias, and I think that, your bias is like looking at this situation, looking at Jan 6 and seeing like two completely different situations, where I think it's almost, of course, there's no two situations that are the exact same, but I genuinely don't really see that much of a difference between this and Jan 6, where, the media played up Jan 6 as like this huge insurrection. But in reality, like, I could argue the same thing that you just argued, right? Where the vast majority of the Jan 6 protesters just wanted to take out their anger and just stand there and yell. But then, a few people broke into the Capitol building, and then, a lot of people just followed whoever was in front of them, because it's like, one person breaks down the door or breaks the window or something and climbs in, and then people are like, oh, we can go in, and then they went in and they just kind of followed the herd. It's not that like everybody wanted to just like, kill all the politicians and take down the government. Like, it was a riot that got out of control. And I just think that this is very similar. And like, to your earlier point about, okay, what if like for Jan 6, that was an attack on the Capitol building, which is like the, official government, where this is like riots on the streets. Well, actually, like, there's video of protesters smashing the windows of the LAPD headquarters and trying to break into that building as well. So they are attacking government or police buildings as well. So it's not just people, burning a few cars on the streets and stuff like that. There are, I don't know how coordinated those attacks are, but there are instances where these, quote unquote protesters, or rioters, as I call them, have targeted government buildings and government officials or government workers and stuff like that. But yeah, Tristan, you raise your hand. I'll give you an opportunity to respond.
So the way I see it, it's kind of a matter of the level of escalation that's occurring. I think that there are bad actors that are doing the attacks, and I think that that's true on both January 6th and the LA protests. There are bad actors in both of those crowds who were basically doing bad things, and they were escalating the situation further than it needs to be. And I think that those are the ones who decided to break into the Capitol buildings. Those were the ones who are burning cars, who are, breaking stuff, federal buildings. These are a significantly smaller group of people, and I think that at this point, currently, the Jan 6 escalated significantly, had already escalated more than this currently has. Also, I'll say that with regards to the National Guards, I do view that as more of an escalation, because the more clashes between the protesters and the police / National Guard, the more likely it escalates from a situation of protest to an actual riot. Because, as if people will retaliate to stuff. So if there is a perception that the police are attacking them, they will defend themselves, in which case this will take someone who is previously peacefully protesting and who wants to peacefully protest into someone who is, defending themselves from an attacker who is the police official, whatever, the National Guard. So by bringing in, by mobilizing the National Guard, who do not have as much training on how to manage the protests and stuff, who will be more likely to make mistakes and potentially have much more clashes with the protesters that take it from a peaceful protest to a more violent protest, or like a riot. That's where I feel like the Trump administration is seeking to basically use this as a way to get more power and more ability to push its agenda and act like like they're trying to escalate the situation so that they can gain more power, because it's more of we're responding to the power, so I need more ability to respond to it, but I have escalated the situation in order for me to gain the ability to escalate it further, kind of thing. It's a creep of additional government overreach, government intervention, and I think that is a dangerous route, because the Trump administration has proven willing to use very broad strokes already on a lot of how it approaches things, and giving it more ability to act like this protest is a rebellion / invasion, gives them significantly more aggressive options to deal with this protest and similar protests in the future, which will potentially cause significant rights and freedoms problems in the states.
Yeah, let me add one more point before I pass it off to Sunil. So yeah, I mean, I don't fundamentally disagree with the idea that this is an escalation. Obviously, like, that's a verifiable fact. But I think what we disagree on is just the gravity of the situation, right? Like, you think maybe Trump's being a little too heavy-handed and he's trying to play this up as in the media to use it as political leverage. But like, here's what I'm gonna ask you, right? Like, if pretend that you live there, like pretend that you live in LA, or you live in one of these areas that had one of these riots, then would your idea or would your opinions on this situation change, right? Because if your area is hit with one of these riots, then maybe you'd be a lot more pro Trump sending in the National Guard to help control the situation, right? Because remember, this is also California we're talking about, where I don't like, again, I'm not trying to bring in things that are unrelated, but I'm just naming an example where, in a lot of these like California cities like San Francisco or LA or whatever, like they let people steal, basically, right? I don't know how else to put it. It's like there's a law that says that if it's under like $400 or $500 or something, then the police don't really go after you. Or if they catch you, they might like confiscate whatever you stole, but then they don't like really punish you. And then the security guards aren't allowed to touch you. So like there's videos of people stealing stuff from like convenience stores, and obviously everything in a convenience store is under $400. And then they just walk out, and the security guard's not allowed to touch them. So they just stand there and yell at them and like follow them around and start yelling. Like, is that going to stop the thief? Like, no, that's obviously not going to work, right? So your idea that this is an escalation, well, in my opinion, this is an escalation in the same way that chemotherapy is an escalation to cancer. Like, you're not wrong, but is it necessary, right? And this is my point, is that it appears to me that California has a history of letting things slide, of letting just like small petty crimes slide, and then they escalate into bigger crimes, and then they're starting to let those slide. And especially with something like this, which has a political tilt to it, where the Democrats are, they're trying to be like pro-immigrant, but then they end up just being like pro-open borders and stuff, whatever like reason that they're pro, they're so pro-immigrant that they're willing to let people, like burn cars and riot without really cracking down, because they don't want to be seen as the bad guy that cracks down on an anti-deporting illegal immigration like policy, right? I don't know. That's just my opinion, but yeah, I'll pass it off to Tristan, but make it quick because Sunil's been waiting for a long time.
Like, if it was my, if I lived there, would I be saying the same things? And the problem with that question is that obviously I don't live there. So I really don't have a good way to understand the gravity of the situation, because from my perspective, all the news sources that I'm seeing have been incredibly biased. If you look from the left side, they're like, this is the most peaceful protest in the world. Everything is fine. Why is everyone losing their mind? From the right side, everything is like, this is they're burning the city down. We're all going to die. This is anarchy. LA has fallen. And from my perspective, I don't really know how to look at this from the outside and really understand how bad it really is. Is this a situation where the right finds the one dude with a Mexican flag and a burning car and is like plastering him everywhere, and that he's the bad actor, and this is like one guy? Obviously I understand that it's not just one guy, but I'm just saying, like, is this what is going on? Like, is it every tiny instance of violence is being put on blast? Or is this a situation where all of it, like, it's a complete riot, people are extremely unsafe, the city is in danger of burning down? Like, how do I sit here from thousands of miles away and judge that situation there from my castle up in Canada and go, this is unjustified, or this is justified? Because to be frank, I don't really have a way to understand if this is going to be something that is necessary or something that is completely over the top. So I can speak to kind of like my perception. My perception is that I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, where there's instances of rioting and there's instances of there's significant instances of rioting and there's significant instances of there's clearly a lot of people who are just peacefully protesting. So is this overreach? And I think that from some of this is going to come down to just like our own internal biases. I have a perception that Trump tends to like to walk things a little bit further all the time. And this feels to me like an instance of Trump seeing an opportunity to walk things a little bit further. So, you know, there have been numerous examples of him doing this as well in the past. Like, you know, the tariffs are a great example of how he, you know, escalates things and then he walks it back to something that's more reasonable. But he's done a big escalation up front to convince you that it is, you know, your 10% tariff is reasonable because it's not the 200% tariff he promised you 5 seconds ago. Like he does stuff like this frequently. That's very much his style. So I can see this being an instance of him looking to expand the capacity of the government to have more hard power in this instance. So that's just kind of my bias, though. I don't know exactly what's going on in the situation. I don't know anyone from LA off the top of my head I haven't spoken to anyone. So I'm really speaking from a third party with functionally no stake in this race, that is just hoping that things, you know, get figured out. And, you know, if it like whether or not this is like something where the protests need to will be ending, or if the Trump will back down. I don't really know exactly how it's going to be playing out, but that's just kind of the problem, is that I think you've come to the conclusion that this is something that needs to be responded to. Well, I'm very much in the place of I don't know where this is in the line. I don't have a way to perceive where this is on the line of reasonable to unreasonable.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say that like everybody's coming out of it kind of blind, and we're kind of just looking at biased media on both sides. So I follow both sides of the media on this issue, and I tend to go on the we should deal with illegal immigration side of the argument. But that doesn't mean I just necessarily buy every argument on like the pro-Trump side. I guess I'll take issue with the idea that like Jan 6 was worse. Like that's the whole point of the debate. Like the majority of people who took part in Jan 6 were actually peaceful. And like, yeah, there were people who like entered the Capitol, but they were just like taking pictures and stuff. And there was a few people who were like bad guys that should have been prosecuted, and they were threatening violence and that kind of thing. So like what the insurrection or like the Jan 6 protest stood for wasn't necessarily, I'm not like standing for like what they were fighting for necessarily. Like you should just certify the results of an election when an election happens. But I think that like when people on the other side of the argument, that's why they take issue with this idea of calling it insurrection. That's just a label. Somebody just made up the word insurrection, but there's no evidence that it was like they were actually gonna like overturn the election. And I think the same thing could be said like on this argument, like a few bad apples. Most people are just holding up signs and supporting the issue that they think is right. But so like, is Trump escalating? I guess I'll go with Andy's point. Like it's an escalation the same way that like chemotherapy is an escalation. But like fundamentally, the issue comes down to like federal immigration laws supersede sanctuary city laws. So like when like sanctuary like cities like LA are allowed to set up sanctuary city laws, but that's still illegal federally. And the federal government in the United States has their authority supersedes state governments and city governments, municipal governments, when it comes to these laws. So if a city has a sanctuary state law, a president might not go into the city with federal police forces and deal with the situation, but they have the right to, because their authority actually supersedes the laws of a municipal government. And so, like, from that point of view, I think that he has the authority to do what he's doing. Is he trying to like win the optics wars and make it look worse than it is? Probably. That's just how Trump works, for sure. In terms of like Democrats and their history on this issue, like, I think that they lost the moral high ground when like the Biden administration just like let 20 million immigrants into the country. So like dealing with that issue is going to look bad. Even if Trump only like removes like 2-3 million people out of the 20 million people out of the country, it's still going to look bad. And every time somebody gets arrested at a courthouse or something, it's going to make the news because the news wants to like make everything that Trump does look bad. Even and sometimes he's his own worst enemy on that issue. But I don't think we should be normalizing like illegal immigration. Like, they're illegal. They have no right to be there because they didn't enter the country legally. I don't care if they pay taxes or not. They are illegally living in the United States. Like, we all come from like immigrant backgrounds. Our parents had to work pretty hard to get their like legal status in Canada. And I think that's the same thing for the United States. So I think that when it comes down to it, Trump does have a strong mandate now to deal with this issue. The American people, when they poll the elections, they're on his side of the issue. Dealing with illegal immigration is a very nasty problem to solve. Using a Trump word, it's a nasty problem. But and it's going to look bad optically, and Trump's kind of okay with the negative optics. He feels like the country's on his side. So I don't think we should normalize it by saying that they pay taxes and they're peaceful. The illegal immigrants are peaceful and they work. I mean, we shouldn't be like bypassing immigration laws so that like certain corporations and certain farmers get free cheap labor. Like, I just think that people should pay the market rate in their countries for wages, and the economy should normalize around that. And I don't think that saying that they pay taxes is enough for me to not consider these people illegally living in the United States. So I think that's actually a serious problem in the United States, considering how many illegal immigrants they do have. It has to be dealt with. I don't think that Trump's literally going to be able to arrest 20 million of them. It's going to cost like $500 billion if he does that. But I think he has the right to like to push back on the Biden administration's open border policies by like having these tough optics moments that basically make it less likely the immigrants are going to walk across the border in an open border situation, and less likely the people are going to overstay their visas, because people shouldn't be overstaying their visas. People shouldn't be crossing the border illegally. And if I, as a citizen of my country, if that was happening, and it does happen in Canada too, I would want my country to deal with it. I want my government officials to deal with that problem. But I take Kristen's point that like he's a politician. He's taking advantage of a situation, and there's optics on both sides. And yeah, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's actually going on in LA, but I think that he has a strong mandate to deal with this problem. And I think that illegal immigration is at crisis levels in the United States, especially in cities like LA.
Listen, like every country in the world has border policies, right? Like, name one country in the world that has completely open borders and just lets anyone in completely unvetted, right? And let's say like here in Canada, Canada's way more liberal compared to the United States, as evidenced by, our recent election versus the US recent election. But even in Canada, if you put on a ballot question of should Canada transition to having an open border where anyone could just walk into Canada unvetted, unchecked, and then, have a right to stay in the country, like, you would not get 50% of Canadians going saying yes to that. You probably wouldn't even get, I don't know, 20%, or probably not even 10%. Who knows? Maybe you would get 10%, but like you wouldn't get a significant amount of Canadians saying yes to that. And guess what happens in Canada too, which is a very liberal country compared to, again, the US these days. Guess what happens in Canada if you are caught illegally entering into Canada and illegally living in Canada, Canada deports people too, right? Every country does. Like, I don't know what the Democrats are smoking when they're acting like, you know, deporting people somehow just like a completely dictatorial thing that only Hitler does. That like if you deport anyone, then you know you're Hitler, and Trump is deporting people who are here illegally with no right to be there. Therefore, he's Hitler. Like, I just don't get it, right? But yeah, Tristan.
I think my only point is that, like, from like just a political point of view, I'm sorry, Tristan. I'll finish in a second. From a political point of view, just politics alone, not right or wrong. Like the Democrats have already lost the moral high ground on this issue. The way the Democrats are acting right now is they're not gonna win back the moral high ground on this issue. Not yet, at least. We'll see how they react to it going forward.
Yep. I just wanted to clarify that with regards to, you know, illegal immigrants paying taxes, etc. That wasn't me saying that illegal immigrants, this is not a situation that needs to be responded to. It was more so just me kind of referencing the Trump has a tendency to basically be like, oh, we're going to deport like the bad illegal immigrants, the criminals first, and then, you know, etc. And compare and suggest that a lot of the illegal immigrants are, you know, criminals, etc. When the vast majority of them are, you know, normal people who just want to, you know, go to work, do the job, provide for their family, etc. And yes, they came in illegally, and that has consequences, and that is you know, something that the U.S. government needs to manage. But like the individuals themselves are contributing to the U.S., and they are contributing to the society in a lot of respects. Whether or not they have a right to be there at this, like whether or not they have a right to be there, like realistically, they've come in illegally. They shouldn't be expecting themselves to have the same rights as a citizen, and that if the U.S. government wants to respond with within its legal rights to deport people, that is again within their legal rights. Like I'm not saying that they shouldn't respond and they shouldn't have a response to this. It's just that, like, I don't like the way that it's often portrayed as like these individuals who realistically are just trying to provide and make their family better off, which is what we all would be inclined to do. I don't like the fact that he often portrays them as criminals, you know, rapists, murderers, etc. But I do understand that because of the fact that there is no vetting, it is also possible that some of them will be, because of the fact that we can't check, because they haven't come in a documented fact, a documented route the way that the majority of people will. And yeah, and so like it's not I just don't like the way that that's often portrayed. The majority,
when you other people, when you make people out to be like the boogeyman, there's a risks involved in saying things like that. So I do agree that Trump does things like that, and his style is nasty at times.
For the sake of time, let's move on, since we've all given ourselves more than ample opportunity to get canceled already. Let's move on to the next story of the night, which we talked about Canada a bit in the previous story, but let's talk about it some more. So we're moving to the wonderful world of Canadian politics, where it's a new week and there's new polls coming out of how the Carney government is doing. And I will ask you guys at the end to give your own kind of maybe scorecard, report card of what you think of the Carney government so far. I know it's like Parliament's only been back for less than a month, but there's been some news that have come out, so we'll go through those as well. Some new bill proposals that have not passed yet, but are looking like they might. But before we get to the bills, let's talk about the polls. So there's a new Nanos poll that just came out that shows that the Liberals have actually gained since the election in terms of the polls. So the Liberals right now, according to Nanos, are at 42.6% support among Canadians. And I didn't include the map projection, but if I do remember correctly, if an election was held today, which it probably won't be a while till the next election, but if there was an election today, the Liberals will win 180 something seats. So they would win a majority with these polling numbers, especially with the Conservatives. The Nanos poll also found that the Conservatives actually dropped 3.6%, which is a pretty big drop, considering that it's only been like they do these polls every like 2 weeks or something, every week or every 2 weeks. So maybe it's just a bad sample, but yeah, it looks like the Liberals are gaining and the Conservatives are losing, and the NDP is actually experiencing a small bounce back as well. Now that Jagmeet Singh has resigned and no longer the leader, I think maybe a lot of people didn't want to support the NDP because they didn't like Singh. But now that Singh is gone, then the NDP is starting to bounce back. But it's pretty bad news for the Conservatives if the polls are to be believed. And Nanos, I know like people say that polls are biased, and I find that Nanos actually is pretty accurate. For the most part. No poll is perfect, but there were polls that Nanos put out during the Trudeau time when Trudeau was still the leader of the Liberals that did show the Conservatives leading by a lot, and Nanos has been pretty consistent on that. So I don't believe that this is like super biased or anything. Again, it could just be a bad sample, but we'll have to see, right? But there's also other polls that kind of suggests the same. I know this is from Ecos, and I've criticized Ecos before for being like super pro-liberal, but Ecos just did a poll that found that net approvals, Carney is at plus 36. So net approvals is approve minus disapprove. So Carney is at plus 36, and Poilievre is at negative 34%. So that's like a 60% gap between Carney and Poilievre. And people are saying, oh, this is echoes, like don't believe them. Well, I think Nanos did one that was similar that showed Poilievre at like -5. So at best, Poilievre is break even between like approve and disapprove. At best, he's just like 50-50 among Canadians who like him or hate him. But Carney is well within the double-digit percentages of approve. So it seems like maybe this is a Carney honeymoon, and Canadians are really liking the new government, the Liberal government so far, which is again very surprising considering where we came from. Just half a year ago, we were talking about the Liberals getting completely annihilated down to like 20 seats or even less. People are saying that if it was Trudeau's Liberals and they went into an election, they might not even make official party status, which is what happened to the NDP in the end. But yeah, it's crazy to think that we went from potentially 20 or less seats for the Liberals to the Liberals just a few seats shy of a majority. And who knows, maybe if Carney had chosen a longer election period time, he could have actually gotten a majority if the polls are to be believed. But yeah, that's kind of the state of Canadian politics. And well, let's talk about, we don't have that much time, so I'll just pick one bill that is, in my opinion, pretty significant, which is Bill C2, which is the Liberals' proposed border security bill. And there's some things in it that are rather concerning, in my opinion. So I just saw this one example of this one little excerpt that was taken out of Bill C2 that is proposing to ban any cash transactions over 10,000 Canadian dollars in a single transaction or a prescribed series of related transactions that total $10,000 or more. So again, we talked about CBDCs in the past and how it's kind of like a favorite idea of the WEF, World Economic Forum, and Carney is deeply affiliated with the WEF, so maybe he's taking a cue from their playbook, and this is like one of the first signs that a CBDC might be coming. A CBDC, in case our audience members don't know, stands for central bank digital currency. Think of it as like a cryptocurrency, but only controlled by the government, and it's only digital. And the reason why they would want to get rid of, let's say, cash is so that you can't withdraw your money, right? So the government has direct control of your wallet if it's all digital, and if you can't use cash anymore, or they might not ban cash, but they'll make cash transactions, have a little fee or something, just increase barriers, and then on some transactions, like if it's over a certain amount, like $10,000, they'll outright ban it. So, yeah, I feel like most people are gonna just overlook this because most people are probably like, "Oh, I never use more than $10,000 of cash in a single transaction, anyways. I don't care." Right? But what people don't realize is that this has the potential to, spiral, and this is kind of a precursor to something else. So that's kind of what's concerning, and that's baked into C2. So we'll have to see if that bill ends up passing as is, or if there could be like some debate and somebody can get this amendment, or not amendment, but somebody could pass an amendment and take out this section or something like that. But that's still kind of up in the air right now. So yeah, now is your turn to respond. So let me pass the question off to you guys. What do you guys think of the Carney government so far? Are there any things? I know we're probably not big fans of Mark Carney on this show, but give him credit. Like, do you want to give him credit for at least, appearing to be a good prime minister to make Canadians like him? Because his polling numbers are going up, right? Like, what is he doing right? Are there anything that he's doing that you actually like? What do you think of the Bill C2 and the $10,000 thing? Is that a precursor to CBDC, or is it just fear mongering, or do you not really care? Or what's your opinion on either of those two things? Anyone wants to take it away?
I think at this stage, like after an election, the polls don't really reflect much. Like this doesn't worry me, or I don't think that and I don't think liberals should get too excited. It's only been a few weeks. There's like a lot of like people who voted conservative in the last election who just feel like shitty about it right now, or are probably just saying undecided. And there's just like people who were like either not paying, and a lot of people just turn the TV off at this point. So they're just kind of listening, and they're just like paying attention to the headlines. So they see that Carney's gonna sign a deal with Trump, and it's like check mark, and like people are just like happy. He's at the stage of his like government where he gets to do like fairly bipartisan things that like all parties agree with. So it's gonna help him a bit in the polls. But like when it comes from like a year from now, or when an election actually happens, like poll numbers like switch really fast. Like a proportion of the population is very finicky. So I just don't even like take the poll very seriously at this point. Like I get like why people want to follow the polls on a daily basis. It just makes more sense when we're closer to an election, though. While this is more like it reflects the point that Canadians are just kind of like, okay, we got a government, let him do his thing, and we support some things that he's doing. And in terms of like what I support so far, I think that the one bad position, like the one bad place that Carney finds himself is that the Liberals did such a good job outflanking the NDP and like kind of like monopolizing the vote of the left, that, and he also took votes from the Bloc Québécois, that like there's all these ridings that are like 50-50, some Conservatives won, some Liberals won in Ontario, that the Conservatives have realized that if they keep going too hard on the degrowth policies and like the WEF policies and just leftist policies in general to try to like attract NDP voters, they now risk losing like GTA ridings. So it's like a really tough place for them to be. So I think that he's responding to that, and there's already some signs that the Carney government is going to go a little bit more centrist with their policies. Like, for example, they're talking about different mining projects and that kind of thing, and talking about potentially. I mean, I'm still hearing a lot of degrowth nonsense in a lot of these announcements, but a refresh. I would say it's refreshing considering what we've lived under for 10 years under Trudeau. The Carney is trying to kind of move the needle on like mining projects and stuff, and he is trying to work with provinces to like fix a lot of like systemic Canadian issues, like the fact that we don't have proper trade between provinces and things like that. So I'm not gonna like just be a negative Nancy here and just say anything Carney does is negative. Like, he's at the stage of his government where he's basically just pushing through the bipartisan stuff. So it's bipartisan. I support it. Especially the things associated with trade and like Canadian unity. In terms of the bill C2, I've read a little bit about it. Like, I didn't know about this one, but that's like kind of, I guess that's giving us the signal that the beginning is a CBDC European type like degrowth policies, trying to restrict the small transactions and trying to like monitor people who are making transactions in the hundreds or then the thousands of dollars, rather than focusing on like the big stuff. Because like, I'm not exactly sure what this means. Like, it seems, but by the language of the bill, it just seems like it gives the government a lot of room to interpret things and do what they want. I don't think if somebody like receives $10,000 over 3 days from like a sibling or something to help pay off their like student loan, they're going to go to jail for that or anything like that. But I do think that it is giving the government the right to start scrutinizing things that they probably didn't have the right to do before. Bill C2 also has some language about how the government's allowed to has allowed to monitor your like social media, so your social media behavior without like a warrant, and there's a lot of like power they're giving themselves in terms of like censorship and social media that's starting to get concerning. I'm not surprised, because like the main reason I'm against the Carney government is I'm kind of against this globalist like especially like censorship and all this kind of like globalist WEF stuff. So I guess my opinion is that I'm not surprised by Bill C2. I think we're probably going to see a lot more of it. I think most Canadians aren't really paying attention to that level. Only like kind of nerds like us are doing that, especially like we're Bitcoiners, so we're like more engaged in that conversation. But the majority of people probably have no opinion on Bill C2. It's not getting that much media coverage. It's a lot more like online coverage. It's also a lot of like blowhard conservatives are talking about it, which kind of delegitimizes the issue for a lot of like middle of the road voters. They're the last people that people want to read their tweets are from like pissed off conservative voters who just lost the election, right? So that's the only problem, is that like the things about the Carney government that is doing, like such as Bill C2, that concern me aren't the kinds of things people are focusing on. They're more focused on like Canadian unity and like trade issues and like worries about like Trump putting tariffs on their products that they're trying to sell to the United States. So like, I guess that's my point. I am concerned about the globalist WEF stuff continuing to come through. I know it's going to come through, and but I will give Carney points for like the few areas where he is basically focusing on bipartisanship, and he's focusing on governing a lot more as a lot more of a centrist than Trudeau did. I'm surprised by that, because I did see Carney as kind of very similar to Trudeau. I think he was like 6 months ago, but I think that he is also a politician, and he recognizes that if he keeps pushing it further to the left, he's going to lose those GTA ridings that they just squeaked by, and he's going to hand the Conservatives a majority in that case. So that's kind of what I think is happening right now. And I don't take the polls very seriously.
Yeah, I think I would say that Carney has been doing currently a lot more centrist things than I think centrist slash definitely more right leaning than his predecessor across the board. So I would say that is more appealing to a wider range of individuals, because I believe that the majority of Canadians tend to reside somewhere between the left and the right. They tend to be a little bit more centrist than either the Conservatives tend to be, and the Trudeau Liberals were. I would say that a lot of people were. Well, one of the reasons back in the day that the Liberals were kind of seen as like the natural party of Canada was that they tended to be very center left, which appealed to more people. But under the Trudeau, I feel like they moved more to just straight left, and that left out a lot of people who were sitting there in the center who were going, well, I'm not super feeling the Conservatives because they're a little bit too right for me, but I'm not feeling the Liberals who are a little bit too left for me. So they were a little bit lost. And I think that Carney is managing to appeal to them now that he's in power a lot better, which is probably a good way to ensure that he sticks around for longer. I think if he had been doing a really not bang up job, like a really poor job that the other parties could criticize him on, then maybe he'd be in a much more rocky position. But because of the fact that he's managed to basically do a lot of things that the Conservatives are going, yeah, but he's not doing more, compared to before, where they could actually criticize Trudeau. So, for example, like with the carbon tax, where Carney got rid of the carbon tax, theoretically, in terms of the consumer carbon tax, he removed that. So now, instead of the Conservatives going axe the tax, they're like, okay, but you gotta axe the additional little bit of tax that is on the corporations too, man. Like, it just doesn't flow quite nearly as well. It's not very compelling. So I think that he's really knocked the wind out of the Conservatives by stealing a lot of their more partisan routes, like different policies, etc. And as a result, he's appealing to a lot of the people who were kind of more center-right, who found that the Conservatives were a little bit right for them, but they couldn't get behind voting for the Liberals again at the election time. So I think it's actually pretty unsurprising that he's kind of had a blip in the polls, because people are going, oh, he's not super left, which I think was kind of the big concern, was that this was going to be Trudeau 2. I don't think people wanted Trudeau 2. I think we very much, the Canadian people had kind of shown that they were looking for someone who was more center than Trudeau was. And I think that they were looking for someone who was more center than Pierre was either. I think a lot of people had a pretty negative reaction to Pierre. And as you can see, and as we kind of discussed with the approval polling, I believe, Pierre he's not well loved compared to the perception of Carney. So I think that Carney is riding on a lot of goodwill right now. He's managed to showcase that he is willing to do things that the people want, and appeal to the more of the center-leaning folks, while not alienating the left too much. So he's managing to convince people that he is pretty reasonable. And I think that a lot of people had the perception that Pierre is not as reasonable. And it's made Pierre's position really hard to argue, just because a lot of the things he could criticize on Justin Trudeau, Carney is already kind of moving against a lot of those things. So Pierre's kind of just stuck in that spot of like, oh, but you should do more. Right. And I feel like that argument is really weak. It's like, yes, I agree with what you're doing, but you should do more. you're not doing enough. And like, that's a lot weaker than I disagree with you fundamentally, and this is the reasons why. So I just think that that's a sign of that difference. And then with regards to C2, I think that this is definitely like Carney, I think, is very much he's gonna sneak some stuff in. I don't think that he's fully on our team. I think that he's more than willing to sneak some stuff in that we're not really into. Whether or not that is actually going to be a CBDC, we'll have to see. But I think that currently this thing with the $10,000, I think that that's not the best look. Particularly, like, I could understand, 20 years ago, $10,000 being the amount. But at this point, $10,000 is like not that much money in the grand scheme of things, right? Because of the amount of inflation we've had, like $10,000 is like, if you were doing a down payment on a house, that's not even remotely close to the average down payment. Like, you're not even in the realm. So like, if you got a cash payment from like an older family member or something, and you were like, I'm going to use it as part of my down payment or something, or like, let me go deposit this into my account so that I can use it as part of the down payment later. Like, now you're going to go get in trouble for that. Like, that just seems a little bit ridiculous. Like, especially given the fact that, like, at this point, $10,000 is basically like, I don't know, like, I'd have to Google the actual inflation rate comparison to like 2000, but like, it's significantly less purchasing power. So the likelihood that someone is going to be using $10,000 cash is actually a lot higher now than it would have been in like 2005, for example. Like, I feel like if they're going to be trying to do something about like money laundering or whatever, I don't see how this is enough money to really help with that. Like, I feel like this is more inconveniencing and threatening to the average person. Well, maybe not the average person, but like a middle upper class people who are moving around larger sums of money. Like honestly, like, the odds that, like, for example, like, you move around a decent amount of money between different accounts, even if you choose to do that in cash, now you're going to get flagged, right? And I think that that's it's just a little bit concerning. It's pretty concerning. I'll say that. I don't love when the government starts continuing to step up its control on how we spend our money. That being said, I do understand that we have a significant money laundering problem in Canada. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing something about the money laundering. It's just, I don't see how this is going to solve our money laundering problem. So maybe that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, totally agreed. And let me just maybe go through the entire like thought process to the audience, in case like our audience member is not filled in on why like this is so bad, right? Because again, like, I understand your point, Tristan, about like $10,000. Like, it's not that much money. You could theoretically like do a transaction of $10,000 or more, but I'm sure there's going to be somebody in the comments that be like, "Oh, you guys are all rich people, like disconnected with like the everyday citizen. Like, I never use more than $10,000 in cash because like that's an astronomical amount of money, and I never would have that much in cash." Like, okay, first of all, like, it's the principle that matters, right? So let me like illustrate out how like this would work if it was paired with a CBDC. So like, first of all, they just ban cash transactions over 10,000, and then they introduce this digital currency that is going to be like, oh, there's no restrictions on this if you use this digital money. And like, most people probably don't even know the difference between like just what we have now versus a CBDC. So a CBDC is it's digital as well, but it's directly controlled by the central bank. So they could control your wallet. So like, let's say if you are caught speeding, they could take the money straight out of your wallet, like without your permission, because they control the wallet too, right? Or if in the future they could implement, let's say, a negative interest rate on your savings account. Let's say if they eliminate cash altogether. So now it's like not only $10,000 or more that's banned, it's just there's no more cash. Well, then they put a negative interest rate on your bank account. And which means that, like, think about what that means, right? Right now, you put your money in a bank account, they give you an interest rate, positive interest rate. So your money grows by a little bit. It's not that much, but like it kind of counteracts inflation a little bit if you have your money in a savings account where your money grows. But then a negative interest rate is like you're paying the bank to lend them money, which doesn't make sense from a logical standpoint, but they could do that. And then right now, if they were to do that, you would just withdraw everything in cash, right? Because it's like, why am I paying the bank to lend money to them? I would just take all my cash and stuff it under my mattress. Well, if they eliminate cash, then you can't do that. And then they put a negative interest rate on your CBDC, and the reason why they would want to do that is to encourage you to spend, right? To further drive stimulus into the economy. So there's also these like other things they could do. They could like implement quotas for certain products. So if they don't like how people are smoking, let's say, right, like you only have, let's say, $100 or maybe $50 a month to spend on cigarettes, and then or cigarettes related products. Maybe put vaping in there too for people who like to vape. Vaping, cigarettes. If you spend more than $50 a month on that, then they can shut off the tap, and you can't pay anymore you can't buy anything that is in those certain categories, right? Eventually, like with the WEF, like people think I'm like joking when I say like eating bugs thing, but that's a real thing that WEF is pushing, right? Because they, due to climate change reasons, they want people to eat bugs as a food source as opposed to meat, which is more kind of carbon intensive to produce. So let's say they implement a meat quota, right? Like you're only allowed to buy $100 or $200 worth of beef every month. If you exceed that, well, then that tap gets shut off. But with, let's say, cricket powder, you can buy an unlimited amount of that. You can buy as much cricket powder as you want. So, things like that they could do. So that's why like CBDCs are so bad. And I'm not just like making this stuff up out of thin air. Like this is stuff that is technically possible once they put the CBDC in. And most people are not paying attention right now because most people don't have the financial understanding to really grasp the gravity of the situation. But as someone, I would say that is, more financially well versed than the average person, I would say that I can see it coming, and this is just my warning, right? But yeah, I don't know who raised their hand first, but whoever.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't have any. I don't think I can really articulate like the problem with CBDCs better than what Andy just said. I think that they're a terrible technology, and like more centralization of money is the last thing we need in our societies. A lot of people outside of the Bitcoin world don't understand the impact of central banking on their lives. Like, they just don't get it. Like it's not explained to them on a regular basis. There was actually even an instance where Andrew Scheer tried to have that conversation on CBC, and he was blocked. He was essentially blocked from having that conversation, and was made to be kind of like a conspiracy theorist idiot on air. He did get a rebuttal like 2 weeks later when he came back in the air. But my point being that like even when politicians like want to talk about that issue, like they're not even allowed to on CBC. And I think partially it's because the CBC knows nobody's going to want to watch that segment. But it doesn't really do much for their ratings either. People want to know like different kinds. People want to know more traditional, spicy political issues, not like structure of like central banking. The one thing I will say, like my perspective on CBDCs, is that they're just like another shitcoin cycle. Like I think a CBDC is a shitcoin, and I think that they're like all shitcoins, they're bound to fail, and I don't think anybody's really going to use them. I don't think the government really knows how to like get people to use them other than regular money, and I just think that they're going to fall flat on their face, even when Carney inevitably launches Canada's CBDC. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think it's going to be like every other shitcoin. I don't even think it's going to be as big as Ethereum. So that's kind of my opinion on that. But I do think they're going to try. And I am concerned generally by Carney and his very pro-globalist WEF policies. I'll go back to the original question too. Like, it's just we're at the phase of a post-election where the conservative, like I know there's probably conservative voters watching this and they're probably ticked off that we're not like saying conservative talking points. Like we're not at the stage where the conservatives are going to formulate like good arguments yet. Like, they don't know what they're going to do yet. They don't even know when the next election is. So they're probably just chilling out, waiting for Carney to make a mistake that they capitalize on. And like Carney hasn't got into the issues that are like actually truly controversial yet. So when he does, you'll probably see polls move around, and you'll probably see some of the shine come off of Carney because he's not doing anything specifically that's amazing. He's just not doing things that are controversial, and he's also focusing on things that, if the conservatives are against, like if they're bipartisan issues, so the conservatives come out against like negotiating interprovincial trade deals, it's just going to make them look stupid. So they're just not going to say anything at this point. So they're just going to be quiet. And like most people are just going to keep like saying that Poilievre's a loser and he lost the election and he's just going to have to stay quiet until he gets an opportunity to kind of reprove himself to the Canadian people, assuming he gets through the leadership vote. But yeah, that's my second like my second order opinions based on what we've been talking about.
Before Tristan, you go. Let me just push back on one thing you said, Sunil, about CBDCs being a shitcoin that's bound to fail. I would not be so confident about that. I would not be so deterministic about that. I think there's actually some very easy ways for a CBDC to really take off. And let's say, like, if I was Mark Carney and I really wanted to do a CBDC, here's what I would do, right? If you get the CBDC, like everything is 10% off for you if you pay with the CBDC. The adoption will just skyrocket overnight. Like, think about how popular the GST holiday was. Like, people say that they didn't like the GST holiday thing that Trudeau did. People really liked it. Like, I asked around, family, friends, everyone loved it. The biggest complaint was that it was only 2 months. That was the complaint, right? That it was too short, that it felt like a gimmick, which it was, because it was only 2 months. But imagine that, but permanent, right? Or it doesn't even have to be permanent. They just made it longer. So like, if I'm Mark Carney and I want to do a CBDC, I say, like, listen, here's the wallet, like whatever, Beaver wallet or whatever, like give it some like super Canadian name and be like, go ahead and download this official Government of Canada Liberal Party stamp of approve, app on the App Store and Google Play Store, and then set up your wallet. And then here's how you can get started on CBDCs. And then if you pay with the CBDC, everything is 10% off. Basically, like no HST on anything at that point. And that's adoption is gonna skyrocket like crazy.
My quick rebuttal is that like that's true. Like if they did that, it would probably help adoption. People like us would just buy our meat from a farmer with our Bitcoin on the Lightning wallet or with cash, and then we would buy our like cricket flavored ketchup with the CBDC. But the reason why I'm not worried about that policy is I know for a fact, because I've been watching politics for long enough, that it's within the DNA of the Liberal Party and like center-left governments that their main goal of being in power is actually taxation maximization. So like they just wouldn't do a policy that would reduce their taxation. Revenue maximization is a very, very important part of being like a leftist in the Western world right now. And like pushing a policy that doesn't call for revenue maximization is a good way to lose votes to the NDP. for the Liberal Party. So that's why they wouldn't do it. That's just my quick rebuttal to that. But I do agree that like we should be like generally worried. We should be watching out. I think that you're right to be vigilant. Like we should be watching for sure, and we should be talking about these things. Like the only way we truly beat the CBDC is if we keep talking about it like the way you are.
Yeah, no, but don't you think they would just do it for like a year as a promo, right? Like that's the concern, right? Like sure they don't want to, not maximize tax revenue, but if you argue it from the standpoint of let's get everyone on board and then like we'll shut off the discount after a year and then maybe we'll even like jack up tax rates like in general later.
I just don't think they would risk normalizing lower sales taxes. Like I just don't see it in the DNA of the Liberal Party. I could see somebody doing it. Like I could see like a conservative government that's really committed to CBDC doing that exact policy. But I don't see a Liberal doing it. I don't see a Liberal taking a hit on taxation and revenue maximization for an entire year because that normalizes the idea that tax rates should be lower and the Liberals would be too scared to do that.
I don't know. I think like there is the potential of them doing that, and actually I can actually see the NDP do that. You know why? Because the NDP proposed like something where they wanted to get rid of all GST on food, like food related items. I know there's already no GST on like basic food items, but like the NDP wanted to extend the food portion of the Trudeau tax holiday permanently. And actually that was something that I supported, as I don't support too much of what the NDP is proposing, but like when they proposed that, I was like, yeah, actually that was a good idea. But the Liberals and the Conservatives, for that matter, actually both the Liberals and the Conservatives ended up voting against that, which was disappointing. I was actually hoping that the Conservatives will vote in favor of that, and then that would have actually passed, because like if they combine, although I guess like there's also the Bloc, so I don't know how they would have voted. But in any case,
I generally disagree with what I generally agree with what you're saying. Like, I don't think the premise is wrong. I think that the Liberals, I think governments want to find sneaky ways to implement something like a CBDC. I just like have enough confidence in like the incompetence of government that I just think it's going to fall flat. That's my general view. But I do I think I'm not saying you're wrong. Like the governments ideally want this to go through, like, and they want to create incentives for it to go through. I do agree with that.
I just wanted to say on the result of the $10,000 one, I did the conversion in 2000. That would be equivalent to just under $6,000. So that's used car money. Like if you're buying a used car in 2020, you're buying the same car you would have bought in 2000, same ass car. $10,000 is pretty much what you'd be looking at. And people might choose not to use e-transfer for whatever reason. They may want to be buying it cash. The fact that they would now be like, if you sold your used car for $10,000 and the person just happens to show up with cash, you are now breaking the law by accepting the cash. And I think that that's kind of crazy, because like, and I'm not saying this is like something that is going to happen frequently and that the average person is going to be running around like, oh no, I can't accept $10,000. I can't, they won't take my $10,000. This is not like a common thing. It's more so like, just like it seems excessive in a world where this is essentially something that people could reasonably come up against, compared to in the past where, it's equivalent to basically them in 2000 being like, you got a $6,000 limit. Like $10,000 is a lot of money, but it's not so much money that I think it should be illegal to pay with cash. So that's kind of just what I wanted to say.
That's all I had for that story. And why don't we move on to our final story of tonight? And this is a quick one because we're running a little bit short on time, but we'll wrap it up after this. But I did watch I didn't watch the whole thing. I watched most of its pretty long interview between Jordan Peterson and Michael Saylor, where they talked for like almost 2 hours, I think, on Bitcoin. Obviously, what else is Saylor going to talk about? And I just wanted to kind of share this quote that came from that interview. I'm not sure if you guys watched the interview, but there was at one point where, you know, Peterson, he was like, he seemed very interested and he seemed totally like encapsulated by like, you know, what Saylor had to say, or like bedazzled. And at one point he was like, why won't Bitcoin, like if everything you say is true, Michael, why won't Bitcoin just suck the investment capital out of everything? And Michael, I forget what exactly he said in response. I'm paraphrasing, but basically he was like, oh, it will. Like that's the whole point, right? Like that's why like we're here. And I just thought that that was such a great moment. And you're viewing kind of an orange pilling process in real time. And I know like Peterson, I think he was already kind of on board with Bitcoin at one point because somebody explained to him how Bitcoin mining works and how like it unlocks trapped energy. And then that was like also a big aha moment for him. But I felt like this interview is probably going to be the one that really pushes him over the edge to become a true Bitcoin maxi after this point. So I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure if you guys watched the interview, but I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on if you watched the interview, you know, get your thoughts on the whole interview. If not, just at least get your thoughts on this quote. Do you agree with Saylor that like Bitcoin would just suck the investment capital out of everything? Is that how you see the future of Bitcoin? And talk about orange pilling process in real life, and you know, talking to Michael Saylor and hearing Michael Saylor talk. Let's this is our opportunity to convince Tristan to come with us to the Las Vegas conference next year, which is happening at the exact same location at the Venetian, which Sunil and I already have tickets for it because they did a promotion where they gave everybody who attended this year free tickets for next year. So I was debating, I was on the fence on whether I was going to go again next year, but if they gave me free tickets, I was like, might as well, right? But Tristan, will you join us for the Las Vegas conference next year is my second question. So yeah, feel free to take it away.
We'll have to see about this the next year's Bitcoin conference. You know, I'll have to look into it. I don't know what the timeline and the schedule's like for that, so no commitment yet, but maybe we'll see. Regarding the interview with Peterson and Saylor, I think, well, generally speaking, I've not been particularly impressed with Peterson in probably the last like 4 years at this point. He's gotten particularly cringe on a lot of topics, so I don't usually watch his stuff anymore. I did watch some stuff back in the day to get where I got relatively familiar with his work and his stances on stuff, but for my opinion, he's gotten quite a bit downhill. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I think the more important and interesting thing was the quote from Saylor, because I do think that is much more interesting. The idea that it is sucking the investment capital out of everything. Well, I think that he is right, but also he's only right now. So in the future, my expectation is that Bitcoin will stabilize at a less volatile rate, but a much more stable evaluation. I don't know what the dollar amount's going to be exactly, but I think that at some point it will no longer be fluctuating the way that it does currently. When that will be remains to be seen. But from my prediction, at that point, that is when it will make sense for investments to be occurring in multiple places. Because right now, it's really hard from my perspective to understand why you would be investing in a lot of different companies when Bitcoin represents a significant value proposition as being a relatively high-performing asset with a predictable-ish cycle with continual reduction in the output, and therefore the inflation rate is constantly slowing down. So Bitcoin represents a really strong option to hedge inflation. And because of that fact, since investments such as real estate and companies, stocks, etc., which is where companies typically go to get additional money, those at some point will have to be justifying themselves against Bitcoin. I don't know when exactly that's going to happen, but it's going to be happening relatively quickly. And at that point, a lot of companies will not be able to justify being invested in over Bitcoin at that time. Because if you're looking at like a relatively guaranteed like 15% gain on Bitcoin, even if it's like 10-15%, even if it's like even though like companies can beat that because of the fact that Bitcoin represents a more stable return. Again, this is in the future. This isn't currently necessarily. It will be really hard to justify investing in a company at that point because you're basically losing the opportunity cost of the gains from holding Bitcoin instead as an inflation hedge. So the company now has to perform better to convince or perform better to convince you to invest in it over holding Bitcoin. And now the problem with what we're currently seeing, and until we're at that point where Bitcoin's price range volatility has declined and the actual amount of investment in Bitcoin itself is a more manageable amount of money, where it's like the changes in price, because there's significant volume, they're not causing nearly as much of a change in price percentage wise. Until that happens, it gets really hard to justify buying a lot of companies, because like you can get a significantly higher potential return from Bitcoin, and you don't really have to do nearly as much research and analysis compared to like a company. You know, like if you were trying to find the Nvidia, you would have had to look at probably other companies. You would have had to, assess the different ways that they're going to be generating revenue. You'd have to somehow predict the Gen AI explosion. If you wanted to buy Nvidia, 10 years ago. But like at this point, like if you want to buy Bitcoin right now, you can get pretty much probably a similar, if not higher, return from buying Bitcoin right now as you could get from buying Nvidia right now, even though you would have gotten a bigger return on either of those if you bought them in the past. So it's just like at this point, it gets really hard to justify the additional risk in a lot of respects. And I think this really comes down to how you're perceiving the risk of Bitcoin. Because if your perception of the risk of Bitcoin is all based around the volatility, where you're like, oh my gosh, the price is going up, the price is going down, the price is going up, the price is going down. And you're not looking at the long-term vision where, the price is going to go up, the price is going to go down. But if you bought it at any point in 2017, you've made money. If you bought it at pretty much any point except for like 112,000 right now, you made money. So like, it's really hard for me to see you might not make money now, but in the long run, my expectation is that Bitcoin will make you money. Whereas like basically any other company, you can't really have that reasonable expectation. And that's kind of the real crux of the problem with what Saylor is kind of talking about, where it's like it's just going to suck the investment capital out of everything. Because like if I'm looking at a situation as an investor where I'm going, should I be investing in a company or should I be investing in Bitcoin? Well, if I can guarantee that I can get a positive return and I have a chance of getting a positive return, why would I ever not buy the asset that guarantees the positive return in the long run? That's really kind of what I think Saylor is alluding to with it, how he's saying that it will suck it out, because I think people are coming to the realization that yes, it's a volatile asset, but that doesn't mean it's a risky asset in the same sense of like how one would quantify the risk, because there's no really good reason why Bitcoin can't continue to increase in value. Like, I haven't had anyone give me a compelling argument on why it can't continue to grow in value. And again, this all comes back down to like how money works, etc. Like, Bitcoin is all about who's going to buy and who's going to like buying and sell. If people are willing to pay more and people are wanting to ask more, it'll go up. You know, it doesn't mean that just because like Bitcoin is worth $2 trillion, no one's liquidating all of that Bitcoin at once. And there's no reason to liquidate all of that Bitcoin at once. But the same thing goes for like US dollar and every other fiat currency. All of these currencies rely on us agreeing that they are worth some amount of money. And there's no real good reason why, well, the dollar continues to go down. Why can't Bitcoin, which doesn't inflate in terms of the amount that's generated in a significant manner, why can't it just perpetually go up? So that's kind of how I think about it personally. And I think that I do like the quote from Saylor. It really kind of is like, especially right now where I'm kind of like sitting here with like looking at like the different investment opportunities, and I'm like finding it really hard to justify buying a different stocks because of the fact that, like, you know, we're kind of in a bull run right now already. We've already had a lot of gains, but I think there's still a lot of gains on the table. And why would I buy stocks that could be affected by tariffs, Trump saying something, and stock market exploding? Like, why would I buy these companies that can be affected by this when I could buy an asset that, yeah, okay, maybe it'll blip up and down a little bit, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really care. It doesn't care who's in power. It doesn't have a product to sell you. It doesn't have revenue targets. It's not going to miss its earnings. So it's like, why would I not want to buy that over buying companies? So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. And I mean, maybe I'm just a little too orange pilled at this point to reconcile that fact, but that's kind of what I was thinking. It's a bit.
No, I think you put it beautifully. I totally agree with everything you said, and I think I really love the way that you described that. I think I'll like try to flesh out your idea a little bit further and see if you can tell me whether I got this right or not, right? So I think that what you're trying to say is that Bitcoin is the only asset that is kind of a hedge against money printing, it is a macro trend. And a lot of assets are, you know, kind of hedges or investments on a macro trend, but Bitcoin is the only one who's a hedge against a macro trend that is based on an element of human nature. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if you give a person a money printer and you give them the ability to just create money out of thin air by doing nothing, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to do exactly that, right? They're going to print. And that is an element of human nature. Like, there's no way that a fiat currency doesn't involve money printing, because like whenever there's a fiat currency and you can print unlimited amounts of it, somebody's going to do it, because that's just like, why would you not do it, right? Because you're literally to have a fiat currency where you can create arbitrarily large amounts of it out of just sheer force of will, and you're telling somebody not to do that, that is against human nature, because you're trying to convince someone that they don't want more money, like that they should want less money instead of having more money. Like that just doesn't make sense from a logical standpoint, right? So whenever there's fiat currency, which involves a money printer, that's the human nature is gonna cause people to print more of it, and then Bitcoin's designed from the ground up to suck up that printed money. And that's why Bitcoin goes up, right? So that's, to boil it down to the most simple, like first principles you can think of, is that Bitcoin is the only asset that is like a direct correlation between printed money and sucking up that printed money, right? Like if you have a fiat currency, it's gonna print, and then Bitcoin is designed to suck it up, and that's the principle that drives Bitcoin prices higher. If you're talking about stocks, if you're talking about anything else, it works differently, right? Like even Tesla stock, I'm a big Tesla bull, and I'm a big fan of Tesla. Tesla stock is designed to create value for shareholders by, doing all these advancements in AI and robotics and, self-driving and electric vehicles. But at the end of the day, they're selling a product, right? And that depends on, the earnings, the demand, the CEO. There's a lot of different moving parts. It's not like a hedge against like fiat money printing the same way that Bitcoin is. Like Bitcoin is fundamentally different than any other asset with that regard, and that's why I think that's the point that Saylor was trying to get across, why Bitcoin would eventually suck investment capital out of everything. And I think that's what you were getting at, right, Tristan? So you have your hand raised, so you can tell me if I got that right.
Yeah, I think that's pretty along the lines of what I was referring to. And I also just wanted to add to something on there. I feel like something that people don't really fully understand is that Bitcoin doesn't need to go up in its value proposition for it to go up in value in dollars, because the dollar is continually declining in value itself. So just by the fact that it's not declining in terms of the amount of money that it's like, the amount of Bitcoin that's available, the fact that the dollar value is declining means that the way it's denoted in dollars, the Bitcoin will go down in Bitcoin will go up in value, regardless of what the currency is actually like doing per se. It's like regardless of whether or not like Bitcoin adoption is necessarily going to be like higher or lower. It's like, functionally speaking, inflation will just flow into the asset price. And it's kind of similar to like how real estate works, where it's like, why are houses so expensive? It's like because the dollar has declined so much. Is the significant part of it is that how much the dollar has declined. It's like, yeah, is it entirely the reason why they're so expensive? No, but is it a contributing factor? Yes. So I don't think people understand that that Bitcoin can go up in value, not because of Bitcoin itself going up in value, but because of normal fiat currencies declining in value, and the way that they're designed, they will decline in value constantly. And that the 2% inflation target that is being targeted by the Bank of Canada, Bank of America, whatever, not Bank of America, the Fed, everyone, that's not what they're actually hitting. That's not actually what the dollar amount is going to be. That's not actually what the inflation rate is. Functionally speaking, I don't like the monetary supply increases a lot more than just what is being considered in the 2%. Like, and like, I don't think people really understand that situation. Like, also, like, for example, like, when you buy a house and you take out a mortgage, the bank doesn't need to come up with all the money for the mortgage to like, lend you that money. They don't need to have, you buy a $500,000 house. You don't need to have, the bank doesn't need to have $500,000 sitting in the bank to support that loan. They can have, much smaller sums of money. And that essentially increases the monetary supply at a rate that we cannot really perceive, but functionally increases it and inflates our assets, which will in turn inflate Bitcoin as an asset. And this is just something where the Bank of Canada is like 2% inflation rate. It's not actually 2%. The monetary supply is increasing by more than 2% annually. There's no or at least it can. Maybe I'm using a little too strong of language. It can increase by more than 2% annually. And to be clear, that 2% also stacks. So you ever pop stuff into a compounding interest calculator, it keeps going, baby. So it's just like I don't think people really fully understand the fact that Bitcoin is like it's not the same as normal assets. You can't really compare it to normal assets the way you would in the past. I think the closest one is probably real estate, in my opinion. But real estate's got a bunch of bloat in there that Bitcoin doesn't have, right? That makes it harder to compare, but they are acting more similarly than many other assets, in my opinion.
Real estate, I think the biggest issue is that it's not fungible, and also it's not as liquid as Bitcoin, obviously. But yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And if you look at the M2 global money supply, I believe it just hit an all-time high as of last week. And it was like the first time that it hit a new all-time high since like 2021, if I remember correctly, because we had a dip in 2022. But 2021, that's when all the Fed stimulus and QE was in the stock market too. If you remember, we had a great bull market in 2021. That was because of the money supply, right? And again, if you're not convinced of that, it's not just Bitcoin that went up in 2021. It's everything went up in 2021. You guys remember the GME kind of hype that was 2021 as well, and then even closer to the end of the year, everything was just rocketing like crazy. The SPAC craze, we had just so many things happen in 2021. That was from the global money supply hitting all-time high, and now the global money supply just returned to that level after a couple of years of a bear market. And yeah, we'll have to see. My prediction is that it's going to keep going 45-degree angle to the right, or maybe even greater than 45-degree angle, right? Because eventually it goes, exponential, even not just linear increase. So yeah, that's well said. And Sunil, you've been quiet for a while. I'll pass the mic to you.
I think that what Saylor is saying is generally correct. That the funny line was when he said he says it won't it go up against everything, when it just suck all the capital of everything, and he goes, it will, and that's why I'm here, which Bitcoiners really thought was funny. It's just the way he says it. Like Saylor has a way of saying things. He gets excited and he says it really quickly, and his the tone of his voice goes up, and it's just funny when he gets excited and he says things like that. But the interview was great. I watched it. I mean, to talk about Bitcoin kind of eating everything, I think we're when you look at global adoption and how many people have it, I think we're not even close to real adoption. And I think that Bitcoin's volatility will diminish as it goes up in value. But I don't think we're I think it's going to eat a lot more value before it truly becomes a non-volatile asset, or when we have a switch where Bitcoin becomes the global reserve currency and we start measuring everything in Bitcoin. I think that's kind of my belief, is that I don't think Bitcoin's volatility actually goes away at all, because Bitcoin is always measured against the dollar, and as long as the dollar is volatile, Bitcoin will continue to be extremely volatile. Bitcoin's volatility will actually go down when people start measuring things in Bitcoin. And then people will start focusing on the fact that the dollar is volatile against Bitcoin rather than Bitcoin being volatile against the dollar. It's actually something in mathematics that's called gauge theory, which is an interesting way of, it's your perception of something can change the reality of the situation. And So I think that he's right about that. I think one way to look at it is a lot of people like Kathy Wiz will like say like she thinks that Mag 7 stocks will just like go up in value in perpetuity and the rest of the stock market will keep going down in value. I mean, I don't totally agree with what Kathy Woods is saying. I think that like all stocks would probably keep going up in value, but relative to Mag 7, it's as if they're going down in value. Like if you own like General Electric stock, like your purchasing power against like Mag 7 stock just continually goes down in value. So like if you look at it from like a relationship point of view, I think that like Mag 7 will continue to gain in value and the stock market relative to Mag 7 will go down. And I think Bitcoin will go up not only relative to the like non-Mag 7 stocks, but it'll also beat Mag 7 stocks.
You know
and
what
I think,
that just reminded me of? Like Ethereum versus Bitcoin. You know,
right.
You ever watch the Bitcoin versus Ethereum chart? Like,
yeah, look at the long chart, how it looks, because people always look at the 5-year charts, but like take a look at the really long chart, and you can just see it just getting eaten away by Bitcoin, which is interesting. But yeah, exactly, it's the same idea as that chart, and I just think that we're probably it just doesn't make sense to monetize your money in stocks and real estate, like monetize your savings, I should say. That doesn't mean people won't buy houses or people won't buy stocks. I'm not exactly sure like when people start selling their Bitcoin and hordes to buy stocks, but I think it's going to be like a really tough value proposition to tell people sell your Bitcoin, buy Apple stock, and you're going to do better than Bitcoin. I just don't see it happening anytime soon. I do think that people will find a reason to own stocks still, and they'll still find reasons to own real estate. But yeah, so I mean, I think we all agree on that. And like Bitcoin is programmatically designed to be basically the most scarce resource on the planet. So like even when Bitcoin becomes a global reserve currency, I'm not exactly sure what happens to the value of like New York real estate or stocks against Bitcoin, but I'm fairly concerned. I'm fairly like confident that Bitcoin, like holding Bitcoin in perpetuity, will reward savers, where commodity prices will keep going down in relation to Bitcoin. Like Michael Saylor always talks about how like we're going to continue to expand our gold supply by 2% a year. That's true even in a greater extreme for other resources. Like we'll continue to find new sources of oil and new sources of energy, and Bitcoin, and just holding Bitcoin for the long term will make sure that Bitcoin being programmatically designed to be the scarcest asset on earth makes it so that Bitcoin will continue to gain against the price of commodities in perpetuity, and I don't know if that will ever stop. I think that Bitcoin is the perfect design because it rewards the saver rather than rewarding the spender. And yeah, so I think that Michael Saylor's right about that. And the rest of the interview was great. I thought it was really, really cool listening to Michael Saylor talk about his perspective being a CEO, how he like works so hard to compete against Microsoft, and how difficult it is to be like a smaller corporation that does everything right, invests in all the right technology, and then like give your employees MicroStrategy stock as a reward, to only see the stock like just like go flat for 10 years. And he also explained that how he used some of his like net worth to buy like Apple stock and Amazon. He put $25 million in Apple and Amazon stock like right around the global financial crisis, like a few years after that, and ended up like making close to like $1 billion on his bet by just holding those stocks, and explaining the value proposition of holding an asset. I thought that was really interesting. And I also thought it was really interesting just hearing about Michael Saylor's life. He explains that he was always like top of his class throughout his entire life, but once he got to like the tech industry, like being at the top of your class means nothing because you're amongst a bunch of people who are all at the top of their class. And how Michael Saylor is kind of like, for most of his career, was kind of a lackluster, not really well known CEO, and how he just found this opportunity at the end of his career, which is making him one of the most famous CEOs in America. So it's a great story. I just thought these are two like really eloquent guys, and it's just really interesting seeing these two eloquent guys talk to each other. Like I even think that like Michael Saylor is so well spoken that he like even he's he's better than Jordan Peterson, and that's tough. Like Jordan Peterson, regardless of how you feel about Jordan Peterson, he's an incredibly well-spoken guy. Like he's an academic, and it's just funny to see him get matched up with. It's interesting to see him get matched up with somebody who's just as eloquent, if not more, than him. And I also like the last thing I'll say is I thought it was really interesting that you got an insight about how like much Michael Saylor like dives into topics. Like he was explaining that when he doesn't just read like a short story about a history of a certain country. Like he'll dive in, read 10 books, and get right into the depth of it. So like when he like uses historical like context to explain his ideas around money and Bitcoin, like he really digs deep into the history of these topics, a lot more than a lot of like historians would. So great interview. I recommend everybody watches it. I love anything Michael Saylor. Like I loved him at the Bitcoin conference, and I just think he's just such an inspirational, like he speaks about Bitcoin in such an inspirational way that like being a bull, I just want to sit around and like fall asleep to Michael Saylor talking about Bitcoin half the time.
Yeah, and if you want to listen to Saylor talk about something that's not Bitcoin related but still relevant to the topic at hand, there's this one great video of him in 2011. This was before he was a Bitcoin bull, where he was talking about the Apple iPhone and how revolutionary that was. And if you recall, back in 2011, that was at a time it was still unclear whether, number one, smartphones are going to be a thing that really has staying power. I know a lot of businesses like and stuff were starting to use them, but like, you know, wasn't in 2011 wasn't to the point where like every single person had one. And even like if a lot of the people who did have smartphones, not all of them were Apple. In fact, like a lot of them were different brands. Like BlackBerry was still pretty popular around that time, if I recall, right? So it was still a debate on like whether BlackBerry was going to win the smartphone wars or the iPhone. I know it sounds silly to talk about it now and think that BlackBerry ever stood a chance, but like BlackBerry was the incumbent. Recall that when the iPhone came out, the iPhone was the challenger, and people are saying that the iPhone stood no chance against the BlackBerry because the BlackBerry was so like established in especially the business world where, you know, if you're a professional, you had one. And to think that situation flipped so quickly, people are like, oh, I did not see this coming. Like Apple just came out of nowhere and took over the market. Well, like if you listen to Saylor back in 2011, he saw it coming, right? And he explained very eloquently why the iPhone was gonna just completely revolutionize the space and take over. So if you're not convinced that, like, because a lot of people when they hear Saylor talk around for the first time about Bitcoin, he sounds very esoteric, maybe to some people, and he sounds, he sounds like he knows what he's talking about, but there's obviously people who are skeptical, and it's good to be skeptical. But if you're skeptical, it's like, oh, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about, but does he really know what he's talking about? Go watch that 2011 clip about the iPhone. I think you'll find that video to be prophetic, and then you'll find his current arguments also very convincing after you watch the Apple video. But yeah, anyways, that's all I had for today. Does anyone else have anything that they want to add? If not, let's wrap it up. So Tristan, now that you're back, you're outro guy once again. So let me pass it off to you for a quick outro.
Thanks for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And yeah, thanks for watching. See you next time.
Have a good one.
See you next week.